Thank you all for being here on a Saturday morning. You could be in your lounge in your pajamas watching cartoons, but here you are challenging your brains at 10:21 in the morning. So thank you so much for being here. As Rodney mentioned, I do have a background in the sciences, and I also have a background in theology and apologetics. And there are points in my life where those two things seem to come head to head in a strange way, and people will say, well, how can you be a scientist if you're a person of faith? Or how can you believe in something supernatural if you're a scientist? Those things certainly can't coincide. One story that I always come back to is when I moved into a new area to take a job as a cell biologist. So I was working in a laboratory, and I didn't know anyone in the area, and I was kind of lonely. But one day I saw this advertisement for a new church that was opening. And so I went to the church and was very awkward and sat in the back quietly by myself. But at the end, the pastor approached me. He was very friendly, very warm, and who are you? Where are you from? And what do you do? And I told him, oh, I'm a scientist. I work in a laboratory. And his entire demeanor changed instantly. And he said, well, you'll have to tell me about all your little theories sometime. And the conversation sort of degraded from there. And it's a common response in the church. Not all the time, but that does happen to people in the sciences. So where is that coming from? And then on the other side, in the arena of science, you sometimes also find that animosity. I remember when I started working in a parasitology laboratory. Parasitology is the study of parasites. And by the way, if you're a young person thinking of going into the sciences, don't go into parasitology because your social life will just plummet. Suddenly people don't want to hang out with you when you've been playing with parasites all day. I learned a lot, though. So I was working in this laboratory, and all of the other people in the lab started to call me the nun when it got out that I was Christian and a celibate. So it was an interesting dynamic to be a scientist in that place. So where does God fit in all of this? You know, as a scientist and a person of faith, one might become discouraged. In both arenas, there seems to be this disjunction between science and faith. Do you have to be secular to be a scientist? And where is God in science? Is he even there? Or do we just try to insert him in some way? Is he the God of the gaps, where there's something we don't understand, we just throw him in to see if he fits? There are many claims that have been made to me personally about why perhaps I can't be a scientist because I'm not secular, and I can't address all of them. But tonight I'll be addressing 3, and these are the 3 we'll be examining. The first one states that the best science has always been done by secular people, always has been, always will be. Secular people do science. The second is that people of faith are less intelligent than secular people, and that's a scientific fact. So we should leave science to the smarter minds because they're more capable. The third claim that's often made is that faith undermines the scientific process because faith is about believing in something without evidence, but science is concerned with facts. I will then, at the end of each of these claims, give my own response, and then I'll be appealing to a response from the ancients, which you'll see in your handout is written there in Latin, and I'll give you the translation as we go through. And you'll also notice in your handout that there's a space for your response to each of these claims. So think about something that you would say in that particular conversation if someone brought that claim up to you. What would your response be? And we'll be discussing that in the Q&A breakout session. So let's dive right into the first claim. The best science is done by secular people. Now, I'm not here to say that atheists do bad science. I've met many brilliant secular scientists in my life, but I do have to make this point. Originally, historically speaking, science was predominantly conducted by people who believed in God. And why was that? Adam made this point last night. He did a brilliant job of examining why that might be. The ancients believed that God wrote 2 books, Scriptura et Natura, Scripture and Nature, that we can find out about God through both of those veins, by studying his natural created world and by studying his written word, that they were both viable. There are so many examples of people in science who believed in God, who did incredible things for the world of science. Georges Cuvier, who was the father of paleontology, who studied dinosaurs and named many dinosaurs. André-Marie Ampère, the father of classical electromagnetism. In fact, the unit for the electric current is called the ampere. Yeah, named after him. Then, of course, we have Gregor Mendel, who was an Augustinian abbot, and he was the father of modern genetics. And he studied pea plants out in his back garden and made all these incredible discoveries about how genetics works. Maximilian Planck, who was a German theoretical physicist, he worked on quantum theory. He actually won a Nobel Prize in physics. Very, very intelligent man. And he was also a theologian. And the list goes on and on and on. I could name so many people. Now, it's important to note here that when we look back to history, we find not only a history of people who both believed in God and did science, but we also find cases where people didn't believe in God, did science, and then came to God through science, they claimed. They claimed that they came to a belief in God because of the science that they had conducted. I find that very compelling. Here are just a few cases. Lord William Kelvin, second law of thermodynamics was sort of structured up by him, and he was responsible for the absolute temperature scale as well. He said this about his experience: if you study science deep enough and long enough, it will force you to believe in God. Interesting claim, isn't it? Here's another. The more I study nature, the more I stand amazed at the work of the Creator. Science brings men nearer to God. Louis Pasteur, the father of microbiology. I love this one. The first gulp of the glass of natural sciences will turn you into an atheist, but at the bottom of the glass, God is waiting for you. Werner Heisenberg, father of quantum mechanics. Now, at this point in my discourse, there might be a rebuttal that, well, back then, it wasn't appropriate to be a Christian in the sciences. So all of these men were atheists, but they were pretending to be Christian because it wasn't socially acceptable to be Christian at that time. I've had many people come to me with that claim. But that doesn't really fit with history either, because you have cases like Newton and Michael Faraday. And during their time, it was acceptable to present as an atheist, and many of their cohorts were atheists, but they still stood for belief in God, and they were very scientifically minded. Michael Faraday famously establishing the electromagnetic theory. So another claim that might come up during this point is, okay, all right, maybe they were Christians, but that was then, and this is now. And now we know better. Now it should be secular, because back then sort of everyone was Christian and you didn't really have a choice. So you should be secular now, in present day. Well, there's a problem with that too, because we find so many present day examples of people on the cutting edge of science who claim to believe in God. Are they pretending to believe in God, or do they really believe in God? Sir Robert Boyd, pioneer in British space science, Francis Collins, Alistair McGrath, John Lennox, I could go on and on and on. There are so many scientists who are living right now who are conducting science and who are very famous for some of their discoveries. How do we respond to this? Well, the ancients had a claim, which was Deus Scientiarum Dominus. God is Lord of the sciences. They said that science was a gift from God, and that God and science were not contradictory. Let's just pause there for a moment. How would you respond to this claim? Picture that you're at a cafe, you're sitting across from one of your atheist friends, and they bring up this claim to you. What would you respond with? Just take a moment to write something there. And if you can't, that's all right. We'll discuss it later on. All right, let's move on to the next claim. People of faith are less intelligent than secular people. I get this claim quite often, and perhaps you have as well. And one time I was having a Facebook discussion. I know multiple things about Facebook discussions. Are they good? Are they bad? Regardless, my atheist friend sends me over Facebook a map that shows in my home country of America where the least intelligent people are located geographically. And if you look at the map, you'll sort of notice a trend that the people with the highest IQ, meaning the darkest color, are sort of around the top of the United States. And people with lower IQs tend to be down at the bottom. So you see that less intelligent people, according to this study, are towards the bottom of the map. More intelligent people are at the top of the map. But then, here's the clincher, they'll send another map showing where the most religious areas are. Do you see any similarities? The most religious areas are in a lot of those same states. They're down in the south, the southeast particularly, and up at the top you have a lack of religion. Oh no, what does this mean? Could this mean that a belief in God or an acceptance of religion is leading to lower IQs? That's the claim that they're making here. Well, you know, another trend that we see when we look at a map like this of America is trends in heat, and you find that temperatures get hotter as you go lower down in the country. Could we claim that heat is affecting the human brain and causing lower IQs, but if you keep in a cold temperature, you'll have a higher IQ? Maybe. Or maybe it could have to do with poverty, where poverty is down at the bottom, people in the top are more wealthy, so maybe it's that people can't afford education. But here's the one that I like the best. You'll see up there a map showing the distribution of armadillos across the United States of America. And the resemblance is striking to that first map. Wherever you find the highest concentration of armadillos, you find the lowest IQ. Are armadillos causing us to become more and more unintelligent? You see, what we have here is a very common logical fallacy. It's called a post hoc fallacy. That's when you see two events running in parallel as being causally related. One causes the other. It's a fallacious argument. My car will not start. My car will not start. I get frustrated. I get out of the car and I kick the tire of the car. Suddenly, the car starts. My kicking of the tire must have started the car. The doorbell rings. Immediately after the doorbell rings, I hear my phone begin to ring. Did the doorbell cause the phone? This is a post hoc fallacy. We wouldn't do this in normal everyday life, would we? Why is it okay to do it when comparing IQ and religion? I don't know, but it happens quite frequently, so beware of that argument. And for the record, if we do a little bit of research and look at the highest IQs that have been measured among people who live today, we don't find this trend of a lack of religion. In fact, out of the 10 people on record currently having the highest IQ, 8 of them are theists, meaning they believe in some sort of God. They believe in the existence of something. And 6 of them purportedly believe in the Judeo-Christian God. 6 out of 10. Now, that's not everyone, but it's certainly compelling statistically, isn't it? And you could say many things about, well, perhaps that test wasn't conducted properly. We haven't measured the IQ of everyone in the globe. Yeah, that is true, but I still find this compelling, and I don't really accept the idea that if you believe in God, you're unintelligent. I'm sorry, but I can't. The evidence states something else. Dawkins, in a recent interview, when asked how atheists should respond to Christians in academia, said, mock them. He said, mock them. He also said, we should keep religious people out of the universities. Why? Because they stifle academia. They stifle the academic process. Everyone knows that religious people are less intelligent than secular people. My friends, that claim is not true. Please don't let anyone say that to you. The evidence points to something else. The ancients claimed that a belief in God increased understanding, not decreased understanding. They said, credo ut intelligam, intelligo ut credam, which means, I believe so that I may understand. I understand so that I may believe. Believing in God doesn't make you stupid. The ancients claimed that it made you more intelligent. Something to think about. But what does this mean in relation to faith? Isn't faith contingent on what we don't know? Hebrews 11 verse 1 says, now faith is the assurance of what we hope for and the certainty of what we do not see. How do we respond to this? How do we wrestle with this? And this brings us to our next question. Is God anti-understanding? Is God anti-intellectual? Does faith undermine science? Does faith undermine the scientific process? When I first moved to Oxford, I had terrible jet lag, and I could not sleep in the night, no matter what I tried to do. And I'll never forget the first day that I arrived in Oxford. I was so excited to get out and see the city, and I couldn't sleep. And I was lying in my bed in my tiny little apartment, and the stars were out, and I just thought, I can't stay here. I have to go out and see it. So I went out in the middle of the night, and there was no one around. And Oxford, in the evening, is the most magical place you've ever seen. All the streets are full of cobblestones, and all the buildings are so old, and they just seem to glow in the starlight. And I walked through the empty roads with no sound but the echoing of my feet and the sound of my breath, and I came upon a tremendous sight that caused me to just stop and stare in awe. And it was this building, this huge, magnificent building with a steep, steep roof. And the stones seemed to be made of gold. They seemed to be glowing because there were these lights that were shining up at the building. I took this picture the next morning. It's not as magnificent in the daytime. But if you can picture at night, when there's these floodlights that come up at it from the ground. And the whole thing looked like it was made of gold brick. It was so beautiful. And I just stared at this and I thought, what on earth is this place? And I had no idea that this was the Pitt Rivers Museum. Pitt Rivers is a very important place with regards to this discussion because it was on another Saturday evening, years and years ago, Saturday, June 30th, 1860, that Wilberforce and Huxley had their famous debate about creation in this very building. Huxley was presenting the church as unscientific. And he used a claim that evolution was king, that evolution had created the earth, and that God did not exist. He used that as a bludgeon to combat the wealth and the power of the church at that time. My friend is a historian in Oxford. I studied with him. And he's read the journal that Huxley kept during that time. And he said that it was fascinating to read about how Huxley openly claimed that, I have a quote here from it, that it was a way of explaining the world in a way that allowed us to live our lives the way we chose. And he particularly mentions sexual liberation. He didn't come empty-minded to this discussion. He wanted to use science as a weapon to liberate himself from the church. He wanted to break the church and its influence on his lifestyle. Are people perhaps tempted by such a motivation today? Could that be part of this discussion that we're still having years and years later? Clearly, this is not a new idea. But let's come back to faith. Is it really based on what we don't understand? Now, Dawkins, who I've mentioned briefly before, defines faith this way. Faith is the great cop-out, the great excuse to evade the need to think and evaluate evidence. Faith is belief in spite of, even perhaps because of, the lack of evidence. Faith is belief because of the lack of evidence. Is that true? What he's talking about here is something that we call blind faith. Blind faith, believing in something even though you have no reason to believe it. I had another email correspondence with an atheist friend recently. I have a lot of atheist friends being in the sciences, as you can imagine. And he brought forward to me Proverbs 3. And he said, well, here, let me just read it for you, actually. He sends me this Bible verse, Proverbs 3, verse 5. Trust in the Lord with all your heart, and do not lean on your own understanding. Ha, he says, that proves it. God is anti-understanding. There it says it right there. Don't lean on your own understanding. He doesn't want you to have knowledge. He doesn't want you to make discovery. He wants you to shoot in the blind. He wants you to shoot in the dark and just completely trust him with no reason whatsoever. That's brainwashing, is what he said. And I wish that he would have read just a tiny bit further down that same chapter. If you have your Bible, I'd encourage you to look at this because this is awesome. Blessed is the one who finds wisdom, and the one who gets understanding. For the gain from her is better than the gain from silver, and her profit better than gold. She's more precious than jewels. Long life is in her right hand, and in her left hand are riches and honor. The Lord, by wisdom, founded the earth. By understanding, he established the heavens. By his knowledge, the deeps broke open, and the clouds dropped down the dew. My son, do not lose sight of these. Do not lose sight of these. Understanding, knowledge, and wisdom, more precious than silver and gold. Is God anti-knowledge? This passage doesn't seem to paint that picture. 1 Thessalonians 5:21 says this, examine everything and hold fast to that which is good. Examine everything and hold fast to that which is good. That doesn't sound like blind faith, does it? You know, I love the story of doubting Thomas in John 20, and I kind of feel bad for the guy. I feel like we give him a hard time because we all point at him and say, well, don't be like that. You know, he asked questions, and like, don't ask questions, just believe. And I kind of understand that, but when I read through John 20, I'm struck by a couple of things that I'd like to bring up to you, particularly around this question of understanding and belief. John 20 describes this event in which Jesus appears to the disciples. And Thomas isn't there when this happens. He's out. And when he arrives, the disciples say, you'll never believe what happened. We saw Jesus. We saw him. He was here. It was incredible. And what does Thomas say? If you're there, it's in chapter 20, verse 25. The other disciples told him, we have seen the Lord. But he said to them, unless I see his hands, the mark of the nails, and place my hand into his side, I will never believe. Does that sound unreasonable to you? I may have said the same thing if I was in his shoes, honestly. But 8 days later, his disciples were inside again, and Thomas was with them this time. Although the doors were locked, Jesus came and stood among them and said, peace be with you. Then what does he say to Thomas? Shame on you. Shame on you for not believing me. No, that's not what he says. Put your finger here and see my hands. Put out your hand and place it in my side. Do not disbelieve, but believe. Examine me. Look at the evidence. Then Thomas does these things. And then he says, "My Lord and my God." That's a responsive belief. God is not anti-knowledge. And I am very appreciative that Richard Dawkins brings up this point of blind faith because it is rampant in the field of science. I would like to bring up scientism. Scientism is a religion which states that science can answer all questions that life poses. But I don't think that's true. Have you spent 5 minutes with a 3-year-old child? Within 5 minutes, they will ask you a why question. Why? Why can't I have more dessert? Why do I have to go to bed? Why? Why am I here? Why are there birds flying in the sky? Why is the sky blue? Why is water wet? Why? Science can't answer any why question at all. Its explanatory power is very strong, but within a tiny field. There are other explanations that we need to navigate this world that science does not proffer. Let's look at this podium. What is this podium? What is it made of? Maybe I could get a chemist in here to chip off some of this and melt it down and tell me what it is, some sort of plastic. This is some sort of metal, maybe. We could take it apart, take all the bolts out. I could have a mathematician examine it and measure it and give me all the dimensions, and I could throw so much science at this podium and figure out exactly what it is and what it's made of. Does any of that tell me why this podium is here on this stage? No, that's a question of purpose. Science doesn't answer questions of purpose. It answers questions about what is, not what ought to be. Huge explanatory power, tiny arena. There's a dogmatism in naturalism that we need to be very sensitive to. Many naturalists, many atheists are more dogmatic than a lot of Christians I have met. And if you are an atheist and you even begin to flirt with the idea of a God, you will be chastised by all of the friends around you. We need to be sensitive to that. We need to be ready to listen, to be kind. Lennox says this of atheism: there are more places for us as Christians to go than an atheist, because atheist undermines the scientific process. He says Christianity doesn't undermine the scientific process, it's actually atheism, because atheism says that the world is just this blind sort of, just random, we don't really know what it is or why it's here or how it works. But theism says it was made for a purpose. Why? Einstein, who didn't necessarily believe in God, but he was a deist, he said the most unintelligible thing about the universe is that it is intelligible. Very smart man. The most unintelligible thing about the universe is that it is intelligible. Why are there laws? Why do things always work the way that they seemed to work in the past? Gravity is 9.8 meters per second on any given day. If you look at just one slide back, the way that our universe, the way that our universe is shaped, there's sort of 7 or 8 different styles of a galaxy. And a galaxy like this is something that's called a double spiral galaxy, and it's the kind that the Milky Way, our home, is. And our solar system could be located anywhere within that double spiral. But if you think about the arms of that spiral that come out, they're very, very cloudy. That's why when you look up along the Milky Way at night, you see that stripe of cloud, that sort of space gas, if you will, and it's really hard to see through. But because our solar system is located between 2 of those arms, we can see out into the universe. But if we were just a tiny bit this way or a tiny bit that way, when we looked up at night, the sky would be cloudy and we wouldn't be able to see stars, wouldn't be able to see out. Why were we put there? Science can't answer that, but it's affected us from the very first time we were on this planet looking up at the stars. Another thing that Lennox said, which I find really interesting about blind faith, he says, faith is not a leap in the dark. It's the exact opposite. It's a commitment based on evidence. It's irrational to reduce all faith to blind faith and then subject it to ridicule. That provides a very anti-intellectual and convenient way of avoiding intelligent discussion. It's not blind faith, is it? It's evidence-based faith. We have a reason for it. We can say with Thomas, "My Lord and my God, I believe this is true. I have reasons for believing this is true." Maybe those reasons are not confined to a test tube, but they are valid reasons. Over the summer, I was rereading through a lot of Darwin's writings. The Voyage of the Beagle, which I absolutely love. It's so well written. Origin of Species, and also his later bibliography or biography. And he said some interesting things in his later writings, specifically around if I am right, and if my mind has basically been made of the stuff of an ape brain, and I've evolved from an ape, can I then trust my mind to do the science that I'm doing? Because the mind that's doing the science that it's doing is derived from an ape. And would I trust an ape to do science? And it was this really interesting passage, and I was really struck by it. But he has a point, doesn't he? Where has the mind come from? What is it made of? The psalmist writes, "Know ye that the Lord, he is God. It is he that hath made us, and not we ourselves." He calls himself Yahweh Osenu, God our creator. He's made us with reason. He's gifted us with reason and senses. And that's the foundation of the scientific method, isn't it? Trusting our senses, trusting our observations. Science is all about trusting reliable testimony as well, and that's what the New Testament is about. You get these passages like 2 Peter 1:16, which says, "We didn't follow cleverly devised stories when we told you about the coming of our Lord Jesus Christ. We were eyewitnesses of his majesty." Eyewitnesses. And Luke says the same thing when he opens his letter to Theophilus, and he says, "Many have undertaken to draw up an account of the things that have been fulfilled among us, just as they were handed down to us by those who from the first were eyewitnesses and servants of the word." With this in mind, since I myself have carefully investigated everything from the beginning, I've decided to write this orderly account for you, Theophilus, so that you may have certainty. Certainty. Interesting language. Interesting language. I don't think that God is anti-intellectual. Some other things we need to do science. We need consistency spatially and temporally. Those principles are rooted in monotheism. We need the ability to make observations. We need to trust our senses. If things are always changing, if we're not really sure if we can trust the measurements that we're making, why are we doing science? We need consistency. You can't have laws without a lawgiver. Who's the lawgiver? Who created all of these mathematical principles that we work so hard to map out? I don't believe it was an accident. Stephen Hawking says that modern physics has disproven God, but I disagree. And I would like to ask him who he thinks the lawgiver is. The ancients said it this way: Deus et natura non faciunt frusta. God and nature do not work together in vain. They don't work together fruitlessly. They're not coming head to head. Nature doesn't disprove the existence of God. See, blind faith and biblical faith both believe in what is not seen, but blind faith is uninformed. And biblical faith is rational, meaning it has reasons. We have reasons to believe what we believe. It's a response to the fact that God exists. It's a reaction to the discoveries that we make about his goodness. Let's just pause for a moment and think about these accusations. Where do you think these accusations are coming from? Are they coming from science? I don't think so. I think they're coming from a particular worldview. Let's take, for example, two people who are both highly intelligent, both of whom win a Nobel Prize in the same field, in physics. And one of them is an atheist, and one of them is a theist. Is it their science that's in conflict? Is it their science that's coming head to head? I don't think so. They both seem very capable. Is it their worldview? Yes, that must be what it is, isn't it? It's theism versus atheism. It's not science versus God at all. It doesn't matter how long people have been saying that, from the Pitt Rivers Museum to all over the world. You can say it as often as you want. That doesn't make it true. My dear friends, people may tell you that you're stupid because you believe in God. People may claim that you believe in an anti-intellectual God, and shame on you. But please don't lose heart, and please don't listen to that. Be encouraged. Belief in God leads to understanding. God and nature do not work together in vain. And God is Lord of the sciences. I've tried to leave a bit of extra time for Q&A because I realize that this is a very emotionally charged theme. And if you need a moment to just think about what's been said, that's fine. But if you think of a question and you'd like to come down to the front, we'll start some Q&A. It's all right, don't be shy. There always has to be a first one.
Is it on? Oh, yeah.
Can you just also, when you come up, can you just say your name so that we can...
So my name is Chris. I'm doing food science, but my first degree is biotechnology. So, well, it's like makes sense now. Like the reasons why I changed from biotech to food tech, it's because food science is because like people in biotechnology is just like non-believer, and like they keep like, why you are believing in God if you are doing this, the evolution and all that stuff. That's the reasons why I moved. But now I realize like no matter what no matter what field in science, you always found that conflict. People will always like try to push you when you say that you are a Christian, especially in the Western world. So my question will be, are we as a scientist, should we like going forward, like, like if you're a scientist, like you want to do your master's, you want to do your PhD, postdoctoral, and then, become a lecturer and whatever. But it's just really hard when like, people in that field, especially in this time, it's like pushing you or like squeezing you for being a Christian. I think for me, it's better for me to just go out, working in the food industry or biotech industry and just work there, earn money, going to church. It's much way easier to be like in the field like university where I have to like, not just like facing my colleague that non-Christian, but also like students and all that stuff. So that would be my question. Thanks.
That's a really great question. Thank you so much for that. You bring up a really important point. And it's interesting that you asked that question because I asked that question to John Lennox while I was at Oxford. And I said, I am not sure that I can go forward in the sciences. It's too hard. It's constant battle. I don't think I'm strong enough. I don't want to expose myself to constant aggression. It's not always that way, but it can be in the sciences. Particularly, you mentioned biology can be a bit more aggressive, and that's my field as well. And the response was, you follow God where you're led. You follow him where you're led. And it could be that he's leading you not to do your master's or your PhD, that he is leading you to do work in the sciences, but we will get conflict even there. We follow Jesus. And the Bible says if you follow Jesus, if he is your number one man, you're going to get conflict no matter what your job is, no matter how successful you are. That's the promise, and it's a tough one, but it's worth running the race. And I would just encourage you to ask him what he would have you do and follow him, and don't be intimidated because it's so hard. I understand it's very hard, but I'm obviously back doing what I thought I would never do, what I walked away from, because he called me into it, and he's given me what I've needed to do that. So don't feel discouraged, and don't change your plans or your passions because other people come against you. Yeah, thank you. Any other questions?
Yeah, I got an interesting question. My name's Sean.
Hi, Sean.
All right, you made the point that the history of science is, so many theists that have contributed so beneficially. You can sort of turn the question around then. Since God undergirds science, and since belief in God throughout the history of science has been so fruitful in discovering how the world works, why do you think an atheist, why do you think an atheist can do science so effectively? You had some examples up there. Another one would be Paul Dirac, who was one of the founders of quantum mechanics, died in the wall atheist. So how would why is it that guys like him were so effective in doing science, even though they rejected God?
Mm-hmm. That's a great question. Thank you for asking it. And I do want to apologize if it came across in the talk that I was saying that Christians are better scientists than atheists. That wasn't my intention at all. I've met many atheists who are incredible scientists and miles above me intellectually. I will never reach that level. I think the point that I was hoping to make is we don't have to feel like we need to step out of the arena of science because we are Christians. So I wasn't necessarily saying we're smarter than atheists. I was simply saying we aren't less intelligent than an atheist scientist because of our beliefs. Is that helpful to your question?
Well, I think the point is that, since God does undergird that, it does sort of raise the question, regardless of how intelligent the atheists are.
Yeah.
Why is it that science can be done by people of all different worldviews?
Yes, that's a great question. I'd like to just read something from Matthew that I think answers that really well. This is from the Sermon on the Mount when Jesus was speaking to just a very mixed audience around him. And he said, sorry, I just need to find it here. Actually, I think I can quote it if I just think about it. So it's in chapter 7, and he says, does he not cause the rain to fall on the evil and the good, and bless both the just and the unjust? He's a good God. He's a loving God, and he gives his gifts freely. And knowledge is a beautiful gift, and wisdom is a beautiful gift, and he gives it out there for anyone who wants to have it. And it's not like the minute that someone becomes an atheist, they don't have enough food, they don't have enough clothes, their mind goes blank. That's not it at all. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I think that's much better. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for your question.
Hi, Alexandra. I'm Marcia.
Hi.
Thank you for your talk today. It's been great. My question is this. The founders of nearly practically every major field of science today are these wonderful people of faith, inspiring Christian heroes as well as scientists. Mm-hmm. And yet today, a couple of you have admitted it's so hard to do a PhD, especially in biology. It's so aggressively anti-Christian. Mm-hmm. When did that change happen? What sparked that is my question.
That's a wonderful question, and I wish I had my historian friend from Oxford here to answer you. He would do a much better job than I'm about to do, but there are a couple of sort of stepping stones in history that you can look to for that answer. One of them is the one that I mentioned about the Pitt Rivers Museum and how Huxley and Wilberforce were debating the origin of man, and that was after the Origin of Species, and there was that idea of can we use evolution to substitute God? Can we use it as a bludgeon against the church? But also there was a lot happening in the French Revolution out of that, and a lot of post-Marxism that was saying, actually, if you're secular, you are more intelligent. So that might be where the more intelligent part came in, but I'm not sure. Sorry that I couldn't answer your question very well. But those are two places to look. Yes?
My name is Hans. I'm also a scientist. And I agree with 100% what you're saying here. Mm-hmm. I was just waiting that that you mentioned methodological naturalism.
That
but
I
you
mentioned,
did
I'm sorry.
methodological naturalism.
Oh, yeah.
You didn't mention it. Can I just summarize it quickly? It says that science can only come up with natural explanations. There can be supernatural explanations, but science has got nothing to do about that. Can nothing say about supernatural. Now, there are some movement in the religious community, intelligent design movement, which says, well, that is wrong. Science has got something to do, can say something about supernatural. Science should allow supernatural explanations. What do you think about that?
I absolutely agree with you that we do find some cases of examining metaphysics within the sciences. And one field that I've come across that particularly is in the field of neurology. So I've read a lot of works within the neurological sciences. One book that I might recommend to you is called, sorry, I'm searching my memory banks, The Biology of Belief, Why God Won't Go Away. The Biology of Belief, Why God Won't Go Away. And it's written by a man called, I think, Andrew Newman. And he is a neuroscientist, and he's a brilliant scientist, and he has examined this question of why is there sort of a soul to a person? Every person seems to have some sort of spirit, and he's not a theist, but he's examined that, and he's injected people's brains with dye before they go into prayer, and then watched the patterns of the brain during prayer. And he's found some really interesting things, and I would recommend that book to you. But in terms of my personal belief, yeah, I do think that a lot of the sciences have looked into it. And then you could ask another question, which is, well, why haven't they? And I think it goes back to that dogmatism of naturalism, of scientism, that says we can't ask questions that are metaphysical because they're unscientific, so don't touch that sort of a thing. Does that answer your question?
Yep.
Great. Thank you so much. Any other questions? Yeah.
Hi, my name is Gerard, and I was just going back to the, I think, email correspondence that you had with a friend of yours about the passage in Proverbs chapter 3, lean not on your own understanding, and you referred to a further passage which would have been very helpful if your friend had read that. How did you, in that correspondence, how do you explain the apparent contradiction between those?
Oh, the contradiction between don't lean on your own understanding and get wisdom, get understanding?
Right.
Oh, yeah, good question. So I think the important thing about the Proverbs 3, verse 5, is that understanding is qualified by the word your. So I think sometimes we have a perception about something, like we think that we understand something, or we have an opinion about something that could be wrong, and we shouldn't just follow our opinions. And I think what it might be talking about there is bias. So preference is not wrong, but bias is wrong. And interestingly, I'm glad you bring this up, it kind of goes back to the blind faith thing of like, this is my understanding of the world, and I'm not going to look for any other evidence. This is my understanding that there is no God, and I'm not going to look at anything else. Well, that's kind of leaning on your understanding, isn't it? It's not being open to other information. It's not being open to the wisdom and knowledge and understanding that is reality. You could be believing something that is not real. Does that answer the question?
Yes, it does.
Great.
Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you for your question. 1 minute. I have one more question. Ah, he's back.
I'm back. But my question will be more practical today, this time. So I think I watched the Ken Ham versus Richard Dawkins lately. And I think Ken Ham mentioned a really good point that like even in science, like the fundamental science, like evolution, Big Bang Theory, like black hole or whatever, you also need faith. You also need to believe to know that it happened. I just want to know your opinion about that. And is it good to bring that up to like non-Christian scientists?
Yeah, I think defining terms in any conversation like that is very important. And faith is a term that people often use in a way that they think is correct, but actually we might be using the same word in a completely different context. So they're using faith to say believing in something despite the evidence to the contrary, and you're using faith as I have all these reasons for putting my trust in something that I might not fully comprehend, but I believe in it because I have reasons to. So yeah, understanding faith, that's very important, and outlining the different connotations of faith is certainly important. In terms of the scientific examples, I'm so glad that you brought that up. And I had a bunch of things in my talk that I actually deleted because I didn't want to take up too much time around that. But there is a tremendous amount of faith required to do science, right? And not just in the sciences, but in everyday life. Every time you cross the street, you stop at the sidewalk, you use your senses to survey the evidence. I don't see a car coming, I don't hear one, I don't see any danger, and then you step into the street. That moment of stepping into the street is still a leap of faith because you don't know. Something could be coming around the corner that you haven't heard, and the science is full of examples like that. Yeah.
So I used this confrontation once, but like my friend came across me and said this thing. Well, yeah, I have to believe that evolution have to be happen, but I have all the resources, all the evidence that like I can examine that evolution is happening. Can you examine that like God is exists? And I don't know how to answer that.
Yeah, that's a tough one because there's sort of two kinds of evidences. There's one that's repeatable and there's one that's not repeatable. So one example of a not repeatable one that we believe in would be the beginning of the universe, whether you believe that's the Big Bang or what, and that is not repeatable, but we can test for microwave background radiation and all those things to say, wow, actually the universe looks like it came from this one little point, and that's really interesting, and where did that point come from? We can't repeat that, but we can, through our powers of observation, say, well, I can make claims about that. I haven't seen a black hole. I've seen that light is bending out here in the universe and something's causing light to bend. I can say that maybe it is a black hole even though I've never seen one. So good responses.
We hope you enjoyed this presentation. Please consider supporting us to get more content just like this. Visit support.thinkingmatters.org.nz or click in the link in the description. If you really enjoyed this topic and want to go further, I would recommend purchasing Science and Scientism by JP Moreland. In this book, philosopher JP Moreland exposes the self-defeating nature of scientism and equips us to recognize scientism's harmful presence in different aspects of culture, also arming us with strategies for the integration of faith and science, the only feasible path to genuine knowledge. We stock this book in our online store, which you can find a link to in the description.